Hello and welcome to another 10 Plus Club with me, Marcus at businessesforsale.com. And today we're talking to Tom Hillier from Shoot the Company, who have been running for nearly 20 years. In fact, 1 year short of their 20th birthday. Tom, hello and welcome to the 10 Plus Club.
Hello, Marcus. Lovely to join you here to celebrate long in the tooth business people all over the world.
Now, Tom, before we get into it, uh, tell us what Shoot the Company does as a business. And then we'll get into the history, because I think the history of how you started is really interesting. But before we get into that, just tell us, what does Shoot the Company do?
So, Shoot the Company is a film production agency based in London. And essentially, we produce film content. Now, I think as we get into the detail of how the business started and everything like that, we'll examine exactly what is film content, what was film content, and what's it become. But essentially, yeah, we are a film production agency based in London who produce film content for many different clients, corporate clients, broadcast clients, all sorts.
I mean, quickly looking at your roster of clients, they are big global brands, aren't they? Like you do sort of content, video and broadcasting content for UEFA, is that right? And other big sporting organizations. And I've seen you've gone into automotive uh, clients as well. I think Volkswagen were on there as well. So it's a really impressive list of clients that you're working with. When you talk about the sort of services you provide, it is a mix now of online and broadcast. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's massively a mix of all of that. So when we started, if you want me to go back to those beginning days already, so we established in 2006. So if you think back to what the media landscape looked like then, YouTube was only 1 year old. So YouTube was established in 2005. We established in 2006. So my history was television broadcast in sport. My business partner, Henry Wilks, his background was in broadcast for the BBC Science Department. He worked on Jimmy's Farm. He produced The F Word, Gordon Ramsay. So we were working in traditional TV broadcast because that's what production was then. But we saw what was happening online, and we saw YouTube had happened, and we suddenly thought, we suspect that corporate clients, the businesses, the brands are going to want to start producing their own content to use online. So that was the kind of the premise of how we set up. So when we first set up our strapline, which now just feels like the most old-fashioned strapline you can ever imagine, was Shoot the Company, films for websites. I mean, it's sort of like, it's as if you were Goodyear cars, you'd be sort of wheels with Goodyear tires, it would be wheels for cars. I mean, it's the most basic strapline.
But also, Tom, let's not underestimate it. Way ahead of its time, because I remember meeting you in 2006 when you and Henry, and it's important to mention that Henry is a co-founder of Shoot the Company and a vital cog in the success of this business. But when I met you both in 2006, there was incredible skepticism about whether a business like this could even work. And I remember asking you, what exactly are you going to be doing films for websites? And you said quite clearly, the about us on a website was often text, and your way in was to replace that with a video. And that was way ahead of its time, because most people you were speaking to said there was no market for that. I remember
Yeah, I mean
people.
that's a very good summary. And I think we met you in late 2005, actually. So we were going around and sounding out people who work in business. We weren't businessmen at all. We were TV production people. So we were going around and sounding out people that we knew, like yourself, and asking their opinions. the majority were skeptical. You were one of the only ones who I think said, yeah, sounds good, go for it. But yeah, you're right. In a simplistic form, that was it. It was like the About Us on a website, let's make it a film. And that's where we started going to market with that. And again, going to market with that as a concept, some people are like, don't be ridiculous. Films on websites are never going to catch on. Others obviously got it.
And what was brilliant about how you and Henry started the business from my own memory was that, and I thought it was brilliant, is you targeted, this was your kind of way in. And I think it's a way in for a lot of people in business, is like, I always ask, well, what is the pain that you're relieving? Every business startup or every business at its heart has to be relieving someone's pain somewhere for someone to make a purchase. And I remember asking you guys, you and Henry, what would be the pain? Who's and I think we had discussions, and you went off, and your way in really was to target companies, from my memory, that had a PR problem. So, and I thought that was brilliant. It was such a brilliant way in because, firstly, it allowed you to go to the PR departments of big companies. And you ended up working with banks, gas and oil companies, oil and gas companies, and the Tory party, which had a big image problem at the time back then in back in the early sort of before they got elected in 2010. They were kind of trying to reinvent themselves, and I'm sure they're going to have to do that again. And from my memory, that is how you got in with a lot of. That's how you kind of started the business before you grew and expanded, and you've kind of become almost like an agency in a way. But back then, the agencies, the established agencies, were not doing this, were they? And you kind of found a niche. And I think that's really important for a lot of people starting in business, to find that niche in, to relieve pain where no one else is doing it. And you kind of did that back in 2006, 7, 8, when you started.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. And we did it through, we didn't try and do stuff that we weren't good at and wasn't our background, i.e., documentary human storytelling. And that was all we did. We took that to the market and to clients to say, look, in order to tell your story in a natural and authentic way, we can make a film to do that. So you're right. We did work with Serco and G4S and Transport for London, who had issues, who had problems, who weren't communicating necessarily in an effective way. So we just did it through human storytelling, documentary making.
But what's interesting, Tom, and I don't think you're aware of it, but that documentary storytelling approach that you took way back then in 2006, 7, and 8 was kind of social media before social media. And I remember distinctly that one of the videos that you made for the Tory party was David Cameron sitting in his back garden just talking to camera, because I know that at the time Saatchi's were the agency for the Tory party and they had all the work, but you came in, and this is what I think was genius. And you said to David Cameron, just sit in your garden and just tell us, just talk to us without a script why you think you should be elected. And I distinctly remember, and I don't even, do you remember this, but Mark Kermode for Newsnight reviewed all the party political campaigns of 2010 and picked your one out of Cameron sitting in his back garden. And he actually used the phrase social realism. And social media is effectively what we saw subsequently was an explosion on social media, on YouTube, on now TikTok, on Twitter, was kind of what you were pioneering way back then, because it felt so fresh. Because I remember the Saatchi ad of that year was terrible. It was a scripted ad somewhere on sort of opposite the Thames, opposite Parliament on the Thames, and it was scripted and it was clunky. And I think that documentary short docu style that you were kind of pitching to those clients in the early days was unique. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
aware
well,
of that.
no, well, I know it's nice of you to say it, and weirdly, I'm sort of thinking back at that time and working with them in sort of 2009 and the run up to the general election in 2010. And I think Mark Commode said, yeah, we were the Mike Lee of political party political broadcast. But no, but the point that you're making, I think, is interesting. Is that MNC Saatchi were this big traditional agency who were making traditional ads, and we came in, we weren't competing with them, but we were in effect, actually, because what we said was, we think you should be making social realism films. We didn't phrase it like that, but we said documentary making films. So we made a series called Never Voted Tory. And essentially we went around the country and we met these individuals, a steel worker in Cumbria, a farmer in Lincolnshire, I can't remember exactly. And these were all people who would never, ever have countenanced voting Conservative, but for whatever reason, the Labour Party hadn't been delivering what they wanted. And we made little 2-minute films about these people and why they changed their minds. It was very gentle, human storytelling, not a great deal of branding on it, not a great deal of messaging, just people telling their stories. And they were incredibly effective.
And from like, that's how you kind of started. But looking, and I knew you back then in your startup days. And I was a huge admirer of what you were doing. I felt genuinely you and Henry, probably without being conscious of it, were kind of trailblazing and really influencing. And the fact that you actually weren't competing with M&C Saatchi, you weren't, but you took, let's not beat around the bush. You started taking the business of these agencies through this kind of unique social realism, which kind of, Tom, it does resonate with the whole concept of social media. It was kind of social media before social media. And what's interesting to me is you then grew the company into what would now be seen almost like an established agency. And the kind of work has changed and evolved. Does that mean now that you do more scripted, more kind of constructed work, but balance that against your kind of origins of truthful storytelling? Because obviously the kind of work I see you do in sport has that sort of storytelling element. You're kind of running the camera, you're letting people talk, you're then going into an edit and you're creating the story from probably many, many hours of footage to create that story. But at the same time, I see you're doing car sort of, you're working with sort of automotive brands. That must be a very different approach. How is that roughly right? How you're kind of growing the company?
Yeah, that is right. I mean, I think our work with anybody, whether it's VW, Audi, or FIFA or UEFA, I think those sort of branded car jobs that you're talking about, it always comes down to real people for us. So there are always real people in our films, and they're always encouraged to behave and act and talk as they would do normally every day.
So even though you're doing these big kind of branded sort of uh, sort of content pieces, you still go back to that original DNA of Shoot the Company, which was real people telling their real story. So that even now that persists in your kind of the work that you do. Do you think that separates you still from a lot of your competitors?
I think it certainly did. We were certainly original and unique when we started. There are many agencies now doing what we do. I mean, I think you just have to also look at when we started the broadband revolution. I think, if we can use an old archaic phrase, was just kind of starting. And we didn't have many competitors because there weren't many people making content for use online. Films for websites, as go back to that old archaic phrase. There weren't many people doing that. Now there are an estimated 207 million content creators around the world. So we've gone from kind of three or four competitors to 207 million. So things have changed enormously. The landscape has changed enormously. Broadcast television, where we started, and we were trying to really bring the skills of broadcast television to the online world. I mean, look, now what's happened is broadcast television is streaming, is using all of that. So everything's changed, everything's flipped. We're now in the creator sphere. We're not in the TV broadcast sphere. So everything's flipped over. But you're right, our principles have remained the same, which is speaking to real people, documentary making, authentic, whether it's Lionel Messi, whether it's a shop worker in Glasgow, whatever it is, we like to talk to people in an authentic way.
And tell me about, like, for you, did you ever imagine, like, when you were working in TV on the production side, did you ever, was it in your DNA to be a business owner? Because it's such a leap, isn't it, to start a business and grow a business? It's such a huge leap of, it's like it does require a completely different mindset. Did you or Henry ever imagine you would be business owners growing a business? Did you ever imagine that as a teenager or when you were at university? Did you ever feel that in your bones? Tell me about that change. What was going on when you made that shift?
This is a very simple answer. Categorically not. I never ever thought of myself as a businessman. I would have said I have had zero business acumen. Going to business with someone like Henry, he would answer exactly the same. So basically, two TV producers suddenly decided to take a leap, and it was just the two of us to start with. But no, absolutely never thought of myself as a businessman, which I guess is a lesson to anybody, is that anyone has really got it in them, because if Henry and I can do a business and set it up and keep it going for 20 years, then genuinely anyone can.
And what were your key learnings over 20? What were the things that, I mean, I've been running the business as well, like yourself, and I'm always surprised at what I'm learning. What have been your key learnings as business ownership? Like what is what is the difference, from working for someone else and then working for yourself? What are the skills that you think you need in order to create that longevity that you've created?
I don't think there's a sort of catch-all answer to that, because I think different business owners will tailor their business depending upon their own skills. So I can't give an answer that would be the right for everybody. But for Henry and I think the key learning is relationships with clients, relationships with staff. That's it. If you get those two right, then you're going to be fine. Because good relationships, good human relationships with clients means that they like you, they want to work with you, they will continue working with you, therefore you will have revenue. And good relationships with staff is, and I'm talking freelance and permanent staff, means that you generally have a happy team and that you're all in it together. And that's one of the big things. There's no blame apportioned at Shoot the Company. If something goes wrong, it's a collective error or whatever. And if we succeed, it's a collective success. So I think relationships is key across the board.
I think you're absolutely right, Tom, because every single person I've spoken to in this sort of small video series that I'm doing, we've ended up with relationships. Everything boils down to relationships, and I think that's what's interesting you say about with your own staff. Now, let me get into that, because what's the split between permanent staff and freelance for your business, for example? Because that seems to be what's happening more in most companies, especially post-pandemic. We we are mostly like a lot of businesses understand how to be remote, and therefore they're taking advantage of freelance. How does that work for your business? The split between full time and freelance?
Well, the TV and film industry traditionally has been a freelance based industry. So we're quite lucky in that that is the culture of the industry that we work in. But of course, Shoot the Companies over the years has changed and adapted as any business does. It grows and it expands. And so we were making the official film for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar recently, well, in 2022, obviously. And on a job like that, we have our core permanent staff, but then of course we have to bring in lots of freelance staff to work on that. So that's a sort of team of 30, 35 working on that. It's the sort of a couple of years ago, we have more permanent staff, but the industry has changed, the economy has changed and has shrunk a bit. And so we have, along with lots of other production companies, gone back to a much more of a freelance model now, which is working at the moment. But again, it could change again. We might need to scale up in terms of full-time staff, but we work in an industry that has a freelance culture, so that helps us.
And what does the end look like for you as a business, like in terms of its life cycle? Is it a business you would at some point like to sell? How do you? I mean, these are the questions I constantly like. Now I'm in my 50s with my brother Andrew. We're like, okay, what does the future look like for the company? Like, how does it continue without us? Is that a question you and Henry are starting to ask 20 years in, now that you're in your 50s? Because that's a question most business owners start to ask at this point.
Yeah. How does it all end? Who knows? It is a question that we've been asking ourselves. Yeah, it is. And we probably need to have a more of a sensible grown-up discussion about it. The media universe is changing so much. It's just so different to what it was even a couple of years ago. You know, if you look at the stats on kind of viewing habits of the UK population, so 46% of the UK population still get the majority of their viewing on broadcast television, which is still a large amount. That's why, you know, Countryfile is such a big hit. But if you then look at the 16 to 35-year-old age group, only 16% of them is broadcast. 40% of their viewing is on social media, is on YouTube, is on TikTok. So the media universe is changing so much. So the reason that is an answer to your initial question is that it's difficult to know how we end because we don't know when that's going to be and what the media universe is going to look like for everybody then. So we are traditional TV broadcast storytellers, documentary storytellers who've made the move into online. But how that changes and adapts in the next 5 years or so, or whenever we choose to finally hang up our cameras, who knows?
Well, always have this debate with my brother. As you know, I like to delegate and make myself as redundant as possible within my own business. And, you know, I take the lazy man's approach, which is the lazy man builds a more robust business in the end because he's not needed or she's not needed. So I guess the end for any business owner is at some point to either, you know, let it completely go with one's retirement or find someone to take it over or acquire it. And I think this is such a huge conversation for a lot of business owners, which is, you know, how does one prepare that point, you know? And it does, I think you're right, it does need a grown-ups conversation. And I mean, thankfully you're still a young man in your early 50s, and you've probably got another good 20 odd years of running this business. But at some point, every business owner has to decide what happens to the entity. do you just let it go? Do you find someone to carry it on, or do you find a way of structuring the company for acquisition? It's something every business owner has to face, and in my experience, very few people, address it in time. That's from my experience at businessesforsale.com. That it's a conversation done too late. But yeah, I don't know if you've ever had any
That's
thoughts
good
around that.
advice.
Pardon?
No, that's good advice. That's very good advice, Marcus. And I'll take it as a gentle ticking off that we need to get a little more on it. But look, I think also 20 years. I'm not sure I've got that much longer in me. But the other key thing to say, I think, is that our industry is a young person's game. We're very conscious of that. We have brilliant young people in their 20s and 30s who work for us and work with us. They are the future of Shoot the Company. So that's where it will naturally end for Henry and I. But and so it should, so it should be handed down to those kind of people who know what that 16 to 35-year-old demographic going to want to see and all of that. So I think it's they are the future, really.
Well, Tom, it's been a wonderful conversation as always. I'm such a huge fan of you and Henry and Shoot the Company. I have really loved how your company has evolved and kind of just swum with the times in the early days, set trends, did something completely unique and different. I love the fact that you're not, and you still don't see yourself as a businessman. You still don't have that air of I'm in business and I've got to be a certain way. And I think that's so refreshing. And you work, when I would always come across you and Henry, you're just such a refreshing group of people and such a refreshing business. And Tom, I just continue to wish you the best for the future. You're an absolute star when it comes to an example of starting a business from scratch, finding a niche, growing it and sustaining it. It is rare. So well done, Tom.
Very kind of you to say. I will take all the compliments that you can muster, especially on the businessman. Maybe I am now. Maybe after 19 years I am finally. But yes, just I think. But again, sorry, I think it's just going back to that authentic way. You can't do anything inauthentically because people see through it. So if you're going to run a business and you're not a businessman, you just got to do it in your own way.
Yeah, and I think all the great, good business people that I've spoken to, their businesses somehow reflect them and their values. And I think there's something in that longevity. It's like if you're true to yourself and the business is true to you, chances are it's going to have longevity. And the businesses that often fail are where someone is trying to exploit quickly and do a flip. And they've never really been in it in the long term. And what I love about Shoot the Company is that it was always in it from the long term, from the very beginning. It was always looking to explore where something could go. So well done, Tom. You're a wonderful example of business ownership. And I wish you and Henry the very best for the future. Thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you, Marcus.
And that was Tom Hillier from Shoot the Company. If you want to know more about Shoot the Company, go to their website and the work that they do. Go to www.shootthecompany.com.